to On Your Own Terms. I'm Patty Talbot, and this is the place where we learn together what it takes to change the world on our own terms and in our own special ways. Today, I am so excited to have with me a new friend, Jenny Halse. Jenny is someone that I met recently in the UK at Stratford-upon-Avon. We were both there doing a coach's certification training that we've been involved in for almost a year now. I knew right away when I started seeing Jenny raise her hand and hearing what she had to say that she is a change maker. Now, when I invited her to come and be a guest on this show, she was a little bit resistant at first because she was saying, I'm not a change maker. I'm just doing my little thing here from where I am in the UK. I had to do a little bit of arm twisting, and you will see through this interview and this conversation with Jenny, she's exactly the definition of a change maker. She's
So I grew up in a place called Sheffield, which is sort of, if you look at the UK and you try and throw a pin in the middle of it, that's about where Sheffield is. So it's in the northern part of England, but probably central to the United Kingdom. So it's a middle-sized city, but is surrounded by what we call Peak District National Park, which is the hills and the mountains and the nature of the middle part of the country, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So I grew up there. I lived there for 20 years, just with my mum and my dad and my brother. So a really small nuclear family, and families means a huge amount to me. It's sort of central to everything I do. And then my maternal and my paternal grandparents, both of which were very, very big parts of my life. I'm still really lucky. I'm 44 and I still have my grandmother in my life, and she's 94, and she is one mighty lady. She is just incredible. Schooling was hard for me, so I struggled with literacy, so I have a bit of an element of dyslexia, and I think, although I've never been properly tested, I always used to get my B's and my D's and everything mixed up. So my grandma used to give me a lot of support when I was little. And then as I grew older, I used to take my English literature books that I was reading. I would drive up to the top of the hills and walk out onto the edges and just sit and read Shakespeare or read Jane Bronte or Seamus Heaney or whoever the books that we were studying. But I would do that in the view and in the nature. Nature and being outside is something that's been sort of part of me and who I am for so long. It's no surprise that when I need some me time, it's outdoor, and that's where it sort of replenishes me the most, really. I live about an hour away from them now, so it's quite easy to get over the hills and just go and see them, and then just pop home back to my home. So the best of both worlds, really. So I'm a nurse by background. That's my bread and butter. So if you cut me through, I'd be like a stick of rock and it would say nurse in the middle of it. When I was a kid, I grew up wanting to be a nurse. I looked after my paternal grandfather when he was ill, and that really always resonated with me. So health and access to health. So I'm very fortunate that I live and have worked in the UK for most of my career, where we have a free access to healthcare. So we have the National Health Service, which is free at the point of need and point of delivery. So I've worked in the NHS for sort of 24 years coming on, and that access to good quality healthcare when you need it is something that is really, really important to me. I've had the huge privilege of equally working in other countries. So I've worked a lot in Uganda, spent best part of 10 years going backward and forth to Uganda and supporting healthcare systems out in both rural and urban Uganda. And I've also had the privilege of doing volunteering work when I lived in Houston in Texas, and I couldn't practice to be a nurse in the States because our license don't parallel over. So I did some work working with homeless youths and I used to work on the streets of Houston. And every sort of couple of nights, we used to go and meet the young people who were living on the streets. And I think both the Uganda experience and the Houston experience just really cemented the sort of, when you need healthcare, you need it, and you need it to be good. And I remember sort of being on the streets of Houston talking to a young lady who was probably about 13 or 14, and she was pregnant, and we needed to get her some antenatal care. And the challenges that we faced to get to that, because she didn't have any healthcare, and this was pre-Obamacare, and equally being in Uganda. So that sort of has spurred me on to really try and figure out and to work very much in that sort of health, and continue to work in that global health arena, supporting nurses throughout the globe to do as much as I can to sort of retain our nursing workforce, so that everybody, and I'm a children's nurse by license, so, but I now work in across the age group, but that everybody has that access to healthcare when they need it. Because I think we have so many sort of inequalities within the world that it's soul destroying when you're having to care for children or adults or older people, when you know there is treatment but you can't get access to it. And so that's been a real motivator and driver for me to sort of get up and carry on giving, really. So I used to work in A&E, so accident and emergency departments in the US, and that was my clinical background. I then have a secondary sort of passion, which is about education. My later part of my career has been about workforce development and education. So to make sure that we've got the right numbers of staff to care for our population. And that's predominantly been in the UK, in the National Health Service. But the work that we did in Uganda was very much around making sure that we had nurses who could care for children and young people, because the way that their system works is that they get generically trained rather than trained in each specific sort of area of life. I am a nurse, and I am a nurse through and through, but I'm also an educationalist. So I came to a realization that I could only influence a certain number of people by giving hands-on care to people myself. But the ripple effect of me educating others is greater. And that's what really spurred on the sort of Uganda work and some of the work that I continue to do in other countries. It's tough. It's tough being a frontline healthcare practitioner, whichever country, whatever part of the world you are in. So it was around how I could, as somebody who's been there and done that and continues to do that, how I can support nurses within those areas. So I have huge privilege right now to be able to support nurses out in Sierra Leone and Malawi and out in Asia, through coaching conversations, to be able to help them to support their decision making and their resilience, their being in a sustainable manner, so that we've not got nurses, certainly here in the UK, we've got nurses who are leaving the profession because of the toll it's having on them. So if there's anything that I can do to really sort of support them and nurture them to stay in the profession, it's that sort of continuous growth of people, so that they're doing it in a way that is replenishing. I know when I qualified, and my first probably 10 years, I wasn't thinking about me or what was right for me. And I think there's been periods of my life that's had a real detriment on me. So if I can actually support nurses, whether that be here in the UK or whether it be anywhere in the globe, to actually to care and to be a nurse, but in a way that is sustainable for them and who they are, so they're true to themselves as well. It's an amazing profession, and I feel hugely privileged to be able to own and hold that registration, but I equally feel hugely privileged to be able to spark it in other people and to keep that spark going. And I think the work in Uganda, we came to the point that we closed the charity down, and that sounds really sad in one way, but the whole aim of the charity was to outgrow ourselves, so that we had trained enough of the population of nurses in Uganda to look after children and young people. It was self-sustaining and they could do it themselves, and it was giving back that autonomy and that ownership, rather than that being that reliance. That said, I still feel that Uganda's my second home, and I've still got a Ugandan family out there that I'm in very frequent contact with. But it was sort of a success factor for us that we trained something like 34% of the Ugandan nurses at the time that we closed the charity down. So that was the bit that we sort of said, right, now we've done it in a way that it is self-generating, that knowledge and that skills, and then we could look at supporting other areas. So I think that's been something that's was instilled from me in a very young age. I was very fortunate to grow up in an area of Sheffield that was very diverse, and my mum was a teacher, and my mum worked in a school that was predominantly Pakistani and Indian communities that they served. And I remember from a very early age going to celebrations at the school, and I must have only been about 4 or 5. And I think we went to I think it was a Diwali celebration or an Eid celebration. I can't remember which. I was a young kid, but I remember the smells and the colours and the food. And Mum was at that school for probably 5 or 6 years, and we were always being sort of brought up to learn and taste and to celebrate Eid and Diwali, as well as our own sort of traditional celebrations. And I remember school children of mine and friends of mine saying, "What do you mean you're having curry tonight?" And I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. And they'd never tried curry. And so I was always brought up, and I think my dad's a chef, so food and sort of different cultures of food was always something that was probably my first foray into diversity, because he was like, he was always testing with whatever different spices and herbs and different genres of food. And then I was lucky enough that when I qualified, I went down to London, and I lived and worked in London for a lot of years in different parts of London, and London's quite it has areas that have strong influence. So you'll quite often get a South African part of London. So I lived in a place called Earlsfield, which is very South African. And then I lived in Tooting, which is very Indian and Pakistani based. So I always sort of loved that variety. I remember when I first stepped foot in Uganda and just feeling like my senses from every different direction. I think it was about, I don't know, it was about 11:30 at night, and we'd been traveling and we were shattered, and then everything just woke up, whether that be the noise or the smell or everything, the heat, because it was hot. I have an absolute affinity to Africa, and some very close friends who are from the African continent. And I went to a restaurant in southeast London with a friend recently, and it was a Ugandan restaurant, and I ordered grilled tilapia, which is a masked tilapia. And I said to her, I'm just going to go and wash my hands, because in Uganda you eat it with your hands so you don't get the bones. And so I was sat there, and she's Kenyan, and I was probably one of the only white faces in the restaurant. And this guy who was sat next to me just looked at me as if to say, who's this white woman eating with her hands? And we had a good laugh, because he actually turned out to be Ugandan, and he'd never been to Uganda. His heritage was Uganda, and he was cracking up, because he was saying, "You've been to Uganda?" I said, "Yeah, about 10 times." And so for me, and your viewers will be thinking, why is she always talking about food? Food's important to me. Learning different cultures by what you eat, and being engaged in that sort of process of wherever you are in the world, of really I don't feel like I know a country unless I've gone and really explored it through their markets and what type of foods they eat and things. So I'm very passionate about different diversities and how that enriches my life. I live in a very white part of England at the moment, and that feels a bit uncomfortable to me. I love it. I love it to bits, but I do miss the sort of the diversity of the demographics in the area. When I left clinical nursing, I had to go through that process of it sounds almost a bit dramatic, but almost like a bereavement or a grieving process. If it was something that I'd sort of finished and I was moving on to something different, and I really had to come to terms with the fact that I was no longer in my uniform or in my scrubs at a patient's bedside. And I remember doing that once in Uganda, in the first couple of times that we'd been there, I'd gone and got myself registered on the Ugandan nursing register so that I had my Ugandan license to practice. And we'd planned about a week's worth of teaching program, and we were delivering teaching. But I was also supporting in the accident and emergency department, and I'd worked with this one matron, an amazing lady who I will remember for the rest of my life. But I'd been to see her on the first day. Every time I went, she said, "Oh, I'm retiring," and I'm like, "Yes, matron, you said that last time I was here." And like the next year, I'd go back, and she was still retiring. So she was there and leading the department, and I remember teaching and being interrupted so many times because she'd send the staff up to where I was teaching to get me to run down the hill to go and help her with a child who just arrived and who was very sick. And I do this 2 or 3 times a day. When I came back and we were reflecting on it at home, I said, we can't do that anymore, because I was doing nothing very well. So I wasn't able to concentrate on the education, and therefore the teachers were the people who were I was teaching, the learners weren't getting the best of my impact. So I was then running down to the emergency department to try and treat a sick child, and wasn't able to do that as well as I could do because I was dropping in and dropping out. And so we came to the really hard decision that we'd stop registering and we wouldn't do hands-on care while we're in Uganda, because whilst I could be there for a week and could help support the children that came through, and often, sadly, you would be in that situation and the children wouldn't survive. And so to then take yourself from that situation to go back up to the teaching room and then carry on where you'd left off was just not sustainable. So we made the tough decision that we would focus purely on the education, and it was the right thing to do. And it is that ripple effect, is that you can share that knowledge, that skills that can then pass on to somebody, and then their care can influence more patients, more young people, their knowledge they can pass on. And it is that sort of golden nugget that just goes from one to another. So I think that's been the main focus of the career since, really, is it's all been about health, but it's about how we can make sure we've got the right people to provide that healthcare. It goes for my attitude around the sort of teaching the local kids in the neighborhood when they come over and we're playing in the garden and stuff, is just about teaching them around what's around them and things, and just passing on that knowledge, or bringing them into the kitchen and cooking with them, and just sharing that, really. The older that I get, the more aware I am of what's happening in our world in terms of our global and our environmental impact. I wouldn't say I'm a huge climate activist, but I do really try and focus. And I think we'd had this conversation when we were at CoachSet about actually what are the little things that we can all be doing to actually do our bit for environmental impact, and whether that's sort of really consciously thinking, do I need to drive up to the shops, or could I walk if I create myself an extra 10 minutes in the day? Or do I really need to be flying somewhere if it's only for a day? the older I've gotten, I guess, as the focus more as we go into this sort of next decade around climate change and the increase in the temperature, it's just around just questioning ourselves and just thinking, okay, what can I do? What small things can I do? So I've recently just left the NHS, and have set up as a freelance basis and as an independent. And I'm very much trying to make sure that I do that in the most sustainable way. And I'm a tiny, tiny little business. It's me, I'm self-employed, but actually just sort of consciously trying to think about that. One of the things I'd just sort of ask all your listeners just to think about really is consciously just being aware of who we are and what we're doing on the planet, and just thinking, okay, what could I do differently? Is there places where I can buy fruit and veg without them being wrapped in cellophane or plastic? Those sorts of real little things. I think if we all did that, it would start to turn the tides, and it would really start to have that impact if we were all just that 1% more consciously aware. And that's not based on any stats or anything, that's just me thinking, okay, if I can just be 1% more consciously aware of what I'm doing, and everybody do that, then actually, and I guess it's that ripple effect of education, isn't it? It's that ripple effect of, right, let's all take our responsibility and see what that could look like. I just sort of think, well, what can I do to sort of change things? And actually, if it doesn't resonate right with me, I'll just ask and just hang on, can we do things differently so that it does feel a bit more comfortable, whether that be sort of work that we were doing overseas, or whether it be through healthcare, or whether it be through, do we really need to be printing stuff off in this day and age? And we've all got devices, and in just being consciously thinking really. And by Jove, I'm by no means perfect at all, but I found myself darning socks the other day, and I was like, because they were perfectly good socks, but they had a hole in it. And I was like, no, hang on, I'm not going to go and buy some new ones. I'm going to actually just stitch these. What I tend to do is just sort of look where the need is at the time. I tend to support things that are health related. I have a sort of a passion around the parity of health, and that's parity between physical and mental health from a global perspective. Because I think we shy away from looking at both sides of health. I personally don't see them as both sides, I see it as one. But I think so for me, it tends to be anything that is pertinent at the time. So I think at the moment for me, the places where my energy and my support are going are very much to Myanmar, to Burma, and to Ukraine, and then more locally, because I think there's a lot on our doorstep that we can do. Because I live in a neighbourhood that's very small, and we have a lot of old people around, and one of them is by herself. Her family live 3 or 4 hours away. Just knocking on them, on their door, and just sort of checking in on them, and just making sure that they're all right, and just having a laugh, and just supporting when they're up, and supporting them if they're having low moments in time as well. So.
She was saying, I'm not a change maker. I'm just doing my little thing here from where I am in the UK. As you can see, she's exactly the definition of a change maker. She's a homegrown person like all of us, who is seeking solutions to the things that are important to her, to the issues that are important to her in the world. And she's doing it through the eye of someone who appreciates and respects diversity, and who actually embraces every opportunity she can to surround herself with people different from herself, who've had rich experiences outside of her own. You see how the work that she's doing in the world is rippling out to make the world a better place. And that's exactly what it means to be a change maker. When we embrace our identity as a change maker, then we open up the possibility that we can inspire other people to see the change maker attributes in themselves as well. And that's the way the spirit of change making catches on. So I encourage every one of you to think about yourself as a homegrown change maker who sees issues in the world, problems, challenges, things that seem important to you, and find the agency inside yourself to step up and do something about them, because that's what change makers do. It doesn't mean you have to be a hero. It means you do what you can, something that matters to you, and you're not afraid to let others see it. Because when other people see what we're doing, then they think, hey, I might be able to be a change maker too. I might be able to make a difference. If you're not sure if you're a change maker, I encourage you to take my change maker assessment, and you'll find out where you are showing up like a change maker in the world. And you might also find some places that you didn't even think about, that you could develop skills in yourself so that you can show up and make the world a better place. Not like everyone else is doing, and maybe not even in a loud and splashy way, but in a way that has potential to make things better. I believe that's what we're here for. And I believe that when we accept our roles as change makers in the world, by living our lives on purpose, by engaging with new ideas and new people who may have experiences beyond our own, that's when we can reflect our change makerness out into the world and make the world a better place. I hope you'll follow Jenny Halse's work, as I will be doing. And if you're in the UK, and you're in the healthcare, she may be looking for coaching clients very soon. And I can tell you, this is a woman that you know will be able to help you in your journey to keep on serving the world in your own special way. I hope you'll look me up at blueroadseducation.org, where you can learn about the 16 attributes that all change makers have in common. You can have access to some courses that will help you develop those skills and keep them in the forefront of how you show up in the world. You can join our Changemaker circles that are mastermind style groups for people who want to be change makers in the world. This is where we support each other. This is where we gather together to hold each other accountable and get ideas and build the relationships necessary for us to show up and be our best selves and our better selves. Next week, I'll have another amazing change maker to share her change-making story with you. And in the meantime, may you be grounded in your beingness, guided in your doingness, generous in your connectedness, and inspired in your reflectiveness, so you can change the world on your own terms. I'm Patty Talbot. I am always learning, and I know you are too.